preseason testing was all over, it was time to get to work on the track. The teams went to move on to the hot but sunny Doha circuit. As the teams unpacked and got ready to go, several developments had occurred. Most teams brought minor upgrades to their cars from preseason testing 2 weeks earlier, but with the CSR team, they were still struggling with the injuries suffered by both drivers at the beginning of the season, and the odd man out would be Kofi Koro, missing out on his first race due to the burns suffered from his testing crash. Aurelio Mazzario would be taking over his car for the weekend, with the other car still being fulfilled by its normal driver. At the preseason testing times at practice seemed to show that the Mercedes and Ferrari cars were very strong, with potential shown by the BMWs, the Renaults, and the Fords. However, the CSR, Maserati, Peugeot, and Asia Road Racing teams all seem to be struggling with ill-handling cars for this circuit. The Peugeot team in particular with their gearboxes, as qualifying closed in. With the practice times all over, it was time to get down to qualifying, which would be an all-dry affair at the hot Doha circuit along the coastline. As we head to the grid, it will be Dieter Wexler taking pole position for the first round of the new season, with Harry Chapman alongside in the Mercedes car. Those two showing brilliant pace in qualifying. Zoe Sharp would be third in the Honda, showing the Honda's great pace. Javier Vasquez would be seventh ahead of both of the Renaults in seventh place, with Wolfgang Schmidt somehow sneaking his BMW into a brilliant 10th place in qualifying. The flying Rick de Graaf would be started 11th alongside the equally impressive Maserati of Iker Vidal. The two Alfa Romeos would show decent midfield pace in 14th and 15th, with Lucia Flores struggling in 16th place, not getting a clean lap together. Aurelio Mazzario would provide hope for the CSR team, qualifying 17th and making it into Q2 ahead of Jenny North's Ford. With the two Asia Road Racing cars very frustrated to not make it out of Q1 in 19th and 20th, and the two Peugeots starting 21st and 23rd, with a deeply frustrating qualifying session. Their gearbox just not wanting to play ball throughout the qualifying session. As the race began under the setting sun, the lights went out and the season began with a brilliant start for the Ferraris as the field piled into turn one at the hairpin. Sarin got a poor start, with Holt grabbing a great start to jump up the field up into third as the second Ferrari fell down the field. As Kofi Koro in the CRS car, who was actually driving, so forgive my previous statement, made contact with Esteban Ribeiro at the back of the field, but both got away with it for the moment as the second Peugeot, Siri Lundqvist, tried to gain positions on the start on the hard compound tire. But as the field went through the middle sector, Esteban Ribeiro made contact with the other CRS car, with the Maserati of Jeremy Woodford, and both suffered punctures and suspension damage and had to pit at the end of lap 1. A disappointing start for their races. Meanwhile, Neil Sarian made a brilliant move into turn 1 to retake 6th place off of Javier Vasquez in the Ford car. The Ford performing very well at this circuit for some reason, much to the surprise of the Ford engineers, who thought the car would only be good in a straight line and not in the corners. Maria Gonzalez had also surprised many by moving up places on the start on the soft compound tire, as teammate Wolfgang Schmidt in the other BMW struggled and had a horrible start, dropping 3 places off the start, including to his teammates, as the field began to start single filing out at the end of lap 2, as Wexler held a very marginal lead over Harry Chapman and Nina Holtz behind in the two Mercedes. But at the beginning of lap 3, Maria Gonzalez began to show her quality, and at the fresher soft tires she started the race on were working as she moved up the field. As the two Renaults began to duel with the two Toyotas in the minor points places, with Oliveira briefly coming out ahead before proceeding to lock up her tires and almost give the position away to teammate Aki Lipinen in the second Renault. As the two Toyotas, Flores ahead of De Graaf, began to battle amongst themselves and the Renaults to try and get the final points places. As Kofi Koro proceeded to make a meal of his tires, locking up and running wide at the back of the field, as Rick De Graaf made a brilliant move at the same time around the outside of his teammate Flores in the middle sector to try and charge after the two Renaults in front. As Chapman took the lead from an off-camera mistake by Dieter Wexler to take the lead of the race. As the Toyotas began to battle once again into turn 1, Flores retaking 11th ahead of De Graaf. A couple laps later, Maria Gonzalez was continuing her charge up the field. Having cleanly passed the forward of Javier Vasquez, she was now charging onto the back of Nilo Sarian and the Works Ferrari. The Ferrari was struggling on his tires compared to the fresher tires of the BMW, and the BMW began to hound the Ferrari through the course of lap 7, closing up to right behind them as Zoe Sharp and the Honda also began to struggle as well, as Gonzalez made a brilliant move to the inside in the final corner to take the place off of Nilo Sarian, who immediately pit to give up the unequal struggle on his tires and to put some fresh ones on to try and go for the undercut that was so powerful at the Doha circuit. As the pit stop cycle began to shake out over the next few laps, the field began to spread out even more as battles began to settle for the midfield, for the middle points and the lower points, as the two Renaults began to battle head to head for what could be the final points playing position, as Oliveira, who on mediums, began to attack her teammate Aki Lipinen once again. The Brazilian and the Finn going at it as the slower car of Iker Vidal in the Alfa Romeo was proceeding to get in the way of the fight. But he had already pitted onto fresher tires, so he was actually for position. As the pit stop cycle continued, though, Chapman clearly held the lead as he pitted onto fresher tires and got out ahead of Holtz, who was stuck behind Jenny North, who was still not stopping on her median tires at the moment. Holtz was desperate to get by to try and chase after the other silver car in front of her. A bit too desperate as she made contact with Jenny North's Ford. Both cars suffering damage and having to trundle angrily back to the pit lane, with the German driver especially frustrated as she was hoping to start the season on a high note. And as for Jenny North and the Ford, it was a frustrating one as well. She also trundled back, having been the innocent party in that incident. As a Kia car streamed by her, led by Siri Lundqvist, who was on the hard tires and surprisingly up to 7th place, as well as a surprising Alejandro Moreno in the Alfa Romeo up to 6th place. As Maria Gonzalez briefly led the race, having cycled to the front of the field being on fresh tires at the start of the race, compared to the top 10 runners being on their Q2 set of tires. As the camera focused on Siri Lundqvist for a while, showing her leading an angry queue of cars behind her as she tried to make her strategy work, starting on the hard compound tires, the only one in the field to do so. But the struggle was proving to be a little too much, as an angry 5-car queue of cars began to battle past her. As on lap 19, Nilo Sarian's car suffered a brake failure, ending his miserable race in the garage. as Moreno began to take up the lead of an angry queue of cars behind him now, as Cyril Lundqvist's hard tires began to fade, as Moreno's mediums were still in a good enough condition to hold off the fresher mediums of the cars behind, including the Honda of Nikolai Surikov and Oliveira's Renault, the flying BMW of Gonzalez, and Iker Vidal in the Maserati as well, who was up to a brilliant 10th place despite everything. Before Moreno's tires began to fall, before Moreno made a slight mistake into the middle sector and gave up 3 positions in 1 lap. Before the Alfa Romeo as the Alfa Romeo crew began getting tires ready to pit their man very shortly. But at the same time that was all going on, Javier Vasquez was having a brilliant battle with Zoe Sharp for 4th place. The Ford was performing much better than expected on this circuit, as he began to hold off Sharp in a mostly private battle, as a charging Nina Holtz, who was up to 14th after her earlier shenanigans, made contact with the BMW of Wolfgang Schmidt in almost the exact same location as her first incident, suffering more damage and having to trundle even more livid back to the pits once again for more repairs and a new set of tires. Holtz's race completely falling apart as the red mist had well and truly set in. But she wasn't giving up, and she could still maybe steal a point if other people had issues ahead of her. But as the cycle continued, an odd fact appeared. Rick de Graaf in the Toyota on the medium tire was still running very well and was up to a surprising 3rd, having not stopped yet, and he was actually faster than Javier Vasquez's Ford and Sharp's Honda, who took advantage of a mistake by Vasquez trying to pass the Toyota to sneak back up into a potential podium position of 3rd. As de Graaf stubbornly refused to give up his 3rd place in the Toyota, despite having yet to pit. It was a brilliant showing from the rookie Dutchman driver, as he was showing his quality already for the Toyota team, and showing that Toyota had very good tire wear, as de Graaf made it all the way to lap 27 before finally pitting the Toyota car onto soft compound tires to try and have a more aggressive strategy. Then, as the field began to spread out, Cyril Lundqvist finally gave up the unequal struggle and pitted her off her hard tires. Having previously just set the fastest lap, she proceeded to have her race thoroughly ruined, getting stuck behind the Great Wall of Hamrin, as she called over the radio. As Hamrin, who had pitted onto the hard tire that she just took off, refused to let the Peugeot by, as the Peugeot proceeded to get stuck behind Hamrin for lap after lap, unable to do anything, as her soft tires apparently just were not better than the hard tires on the Asia Road Racing Team car. As Lundqvist would proceed to get extremely furious over the radio, letting her frustrations be known, as the battle up front continued, as the two Renaults were still running in very solid positions in the midfield, Lipinen ahead of Oliveira, as Dieter Wexler, who unseen by the cameras, had pitted for a second set of mediums way earlier than Harry Chapman had, and proceeded to take chunks out of Chapman's lead. It would be interesting to see if Wexler on his tires could make it to the end by doing almost half the race on a set of medium tires, as Chapman would easily have the fresher tires at the end of the race. Other contenders as well were emerging. The two Alfa Romeos of Moreno and Blanc were running 10th and 11th, showing surprisingly good pace despite the situation, as the Renault team decided to allow Oliveira through to give her a better shot, as she was on fresher tires than teammate Lipinen, and with a charging Surikov behind as well. until Surikov pitted with only 7 laps to go for more soft tires, coming out just ahead of Oliveira, who had pitted on the fresh mediums several laps earlier. Surikov began to make a charting the charge ahead of Nina Holtz, who, despite all her incidents, was back up to a brilliant 7th place, and was on a desperate defense drive to try and hold on to any points at all. Any points she could get could be critical in a championship where her biggest title rival might be in the other car. As Surikov began to try and bully his way by Holtz, but someone else beat him to it. Rick DeGraff in the Toyota, once again showing his quality, managed to pull a move brilliantly on the inside to clear Nina Holtz in the Mercedes car to get up into 6th place. As Holtz began to struggle further on her tires very old compared to everyone else's tires, as she continued to try to desperately defend from Nikolai Surikov, and then a surprise attack from the 2 Renaults. Oliveira again ahead of Aki Lipinen. Holtz's defense was desperate. She was trying everything she could within the letter of the law to try and defend her position, desperate to hold on to any points possible, knowing that her teammate would be scoring more points than her no matter what. She was desperate to hold on, but could she do it for 5 more laps? The answer would soon become clear, as Surikov also had to deal with an unequal struggle of trying to attack Nina Holtz, but defend from now Aki Lipinen, who had managed to sneak by teammate Oliveira in the melee. But as it soon proved, it would be elementary, as Holtz at the end of lap 48 locked up and proceeded to lose position to Surikov and Lipinen, but just barely had enough tire life left in her tires to hold on to P9 for the moment, as she desperately tried to hold on to any points at all. But as the race began to come to a close, Chapman, despite having fresher tires and closing to within 1.5 seconds by the final lap, would not have enough to be able to challenge Dieter Wexler in the Ferrari, who would take the win for the first round at Doha, as Esteban Ribeiro would set the fastest lap of the race to salvage Persia's weekend by giving them 2 points for the fastest lap. As Wexler won, Chapman would be in a brilliant but frustrating 2nd place, having led a decent portion of the race. Sharp would bring 3rd to Honda, showing them to have pretty good pace as well, despite being 30 seconds down on the winner. With Javier Vasquez backing up Ford's performance with a brilliant 4th place, Maria Gonzalez in an excellent 5th from 13th on the grid, Rick DeGraff showing his quality and Toyota's performance in 6th, Aki Lipinen in 7th in the Renault, ahead of teammate Oliveira in 9th, as Nina Holtz suffered a puncture with just a sector to go, and proceeded to drop out of the points and finish a frustrating 11th place. It was a surprising day, as several drivers performed much better than expected, and several teams had a lot of work to do before the next race at the Yokohama Figure 8 circuit in a few weeks' time. So, with that out of the way, it was a very interesting race, and the teams would get ready for Yokohama.